Thank you so much for joining us. We're about to start the People Puzzles live webinar for today. So fantastic, I've got Karen with me, so let's get started. It's great to be speaking to everybody again this morning. We started this webinar series a couple of weeks into the COVID lockdown, and we've been using it to explore and think about what's been changing and how we can really get our businesses in shape for the next step. 2 weeks ago, we talked about restructuring for success, and today we're talking about high performance. Just to give you a brief intro into People Puzzles, we provide risk-free, affordable access to HR superstars who help businesses to scale. We've been really focused on growth for the past few years, and now obviously helping companies do more restructuring, looking at how to get fit for the next stage of business and survive some of the economic threats and hopefully grow through those as well. So we take away people's stress and help business leaders to focus on what they do best. So I've got Karen Glasse with me today. Karen has been an HR director and senior leader in Santander Technology at Visa, and more recently at a range of small and medium-sized companies. So Karen, it's great to have you with me today. Karen's at the People Puzzles team.
Good to be here, Ally.
Brilliant. And we're going to be looking at how to create a performance culture in this new remote world. And I mean, isn't it important to know that our teams are performing effectively? Karen, it'd be great if you can kick off by talking to us a little bit about what you see happening right now.
Well, it's such a big question, like the context that we're operating in. I can probably summarize it in one word, and that's history. You know, you had the 1919 Spanish flu, we've got the 2020 COVID-19. It's the sort of stuff that our grandchildren and kids will be learning about. So it's been quite an emotional roller coaster over the last few months. And perhaps one of the ways of looking at it is just looking at snapshots, different news clippings. So let's sort of wheel our minds back to May this year, which feels like forever ago. And it's where we were recognizing, perhaps for the first time, that the stigma that was previously attached to work from home has been broken. That we started, I don't know, we were thinking initially where we're in an information economy, then the gig economy, it's now the work from home economy. Life moved on a little bit, and it then got, you know, we started using quite emotional language. So the cliche of the new normal, words like social distancing dystopia starts emerging. But actually, it's a recognition that, you know, there's some great things that's happening, but also that we're wrestling with a lot of problems that are presenting to us. Other sorts of things that have come up are other people. Some organizations, Fujitsu is not the only one, but Google, Facebook, Twitter, Slack, they're all fully embracing a permanent work from home plan. So this is something which isn't with us just for a couple of months, right? This is something which is going to be with us for many, well, for the future, in effect. So moving on then, it's like looking at that. And then you've got, this was last week actually, in the Wall Street Journal, Laszlo Bock was the chief people officer at Google, and actually trying to practically think around, so what does this mean for us in the world of work? So you've had, you know, we were talking about work from home. Is it something which is on a permanent basis? What does that look like? And how do we remote onboard, you know, new starters, et cetera, et cetera. And guess finally, one of the other things that we're going to say here is that, so Google have also announced that they're staying at home till next summer. That's 12 months from now. That's a whole year away. Doesn't that make you take in a sharp breath? So we're looking at a situation where we're almost in the eye of a storm of a giant global experiment. And I do believe it's going to be an historic switch. And so things that we're seeing changing now will live with us for quite some time to come. So I guess that's what's happening.
These big companies are making these huge statements, and actually in the mid-tier and for business owners in that smaller section, it feels maybe there's more flexibility, and there doesn't have to be that dramatic statement, because actually the world's not watching them in the same way. So we can be a bit more flexible. So look, with all of this, what are the problems that CEOs need to solve?
So this actually presents quite a number of different dilemmas for business leaders at the present moment. That's despite, this is without focusing on the obvious, like my marketplace has changed, my customers are not back at work, how do I service them? Things like, financially, how am I going to survive? Or perhaps how am I going to thrive, as in perhaps you've got cash in the bank and are looking to, purchase or move into areas which you couldn't previously do. If we go back to the people problems CEOs are trying to solve, this is around, are my jobs suited to working from home? There was a study actually saying that only 49% of jobs are actually suitable for that. So despite these great statements, Google, etc., that it's not for everybody. And also we're seeing a lot of patching together. So it's not purely work from home or purely work in the office. There's a lot of combinations in between. Productivity is the key one, which I know we're going to be talking about today. So how can my people be as productive at home as at work? And just the whole move from physical to digital. I'm sure business leaders will identify with all the Zooms, Teams, Google Meets that they've been doing, that occasionally coming on screen as an employee looking like a Neanderthal because of what's been happening over the last few months. But it's the online behavior and the culture and the meeting culture, which is now online, and how to relate. So there's quite a number of very big problems that CEOs are looking at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. And that move to digital suits some people better than others as well, doesn't it? So some of us feel more digital natives and keen to embrace technology, and for other people that's quite scary and more reluctant.
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit more about productivity. What are some of the pitfalls? What's stopping us from being more productive?
It's quite an interesting question, actually. I did a recent study with a client, and part of the sort of just general engagement study, we looked at COVID and lockdown, the 3 questions. And in that survey, 95% of the people felt cared for by the company during this period, highly positive. 99% felt that that the company itself had responded professionally. But what was really interesting was the question around productivity. And if we look at that, 23% have not answered that positively, as in being as productive as before. Now, you might think that's great, actually. That's a pretty strong positive result. But this is an internet scale up. They were totally able and frequently did work from home anyway before lockdown. So there's quite a lot of differences between the pitfalls of working from home and pitfalls of working from home during lockdown. Okay, so let's perhaps take a look at some of those. So these are some of the things you can instantly identify with. So I'm going to ask you to click that button, Ally.
Yeah, well,
what's happening here?
I mean, it wasn't quite as bad as the BBC guy, because I wasn't on the BBC News, but I was live streaming to 50 or so people, and my child did come in. And then I think probably what made it a little bit worse was that my husband was downstairs working out, and he had to come in and rescue her wearing just his sports shorts. So that was a bit of a shock for everybody who was watching. And the recovery was, well, you can see my embarrassed smile there. But yeah, it is hard, isn't it, working from home when we've got crazy distractions and, schools are still out. So that's going to carry on until, well, we're hoping for September, everybody going back.
So that's the children issue and all of those others that go with it.
Yeah. So look, golden question. How do we improve productivity in our businesses?
This is the golden question. I mean, this is the holy grail, isn't it? This is what we're all after. How can my business be even more successful than it is? So firstly, productivity. The OECD, you're probably familiar with this, but they measure productivity through GDP divided by average number of hours worked, typically, to come up with a country list of who is more productive than who. And the UK never is never near that sort of very top end. It's sort of like about a third of the way down. And that's not as a result of the number of hours worked, right? So it's not to do with increasing the number of hours somebody works and therefore I'm more productive. And in fact, people at the bottom of the list have some of the highest levels of hours worked, right? So if we'd like to translate this now into business and your particular business. So if you imagine the top, or the GDP, is your output, you already know and understand probably how to measure that. And what we're going to focus on here is the input. So we know that average number of hours, if you just looked at that for your staff, is probably not going to give you all the answers you're looking for. So I've tried to unpack it here. And we're going to use a model which is looking at it on 3 different levels. And you'll see as we talk through this, that this isn't a particularly simple topic. This is quite a complex number of variables that interplay here. So if we look at business, that's looking at things like your strategic messaging. Have you got your business on a page? Can you explain your vision? What is your culture like? You know, have you enabled your people to be able to do their jobs? If we drop down a level from that to the variety of different teams that you've got, it's, have you got the right people in those teams? Are they well-oiled machines? Are they working well together? Do they understand what happens when things go wrong? And then finally, the one that we can all immediately identify because it directly relates to ourselves is how motivated am I as an individual, knowing that when you're highly motivated, you do put in extra effort. So we're going to use this model to walk ourselves through how to increase productivity. So let's start with the first one, which is around individual. So this is one we can identify with. So think about yourself and your, you know, perhaps the last 12 months, highs, lows, when you felt more productive than others, and try and unpick that and unpack that as to why. And you probably think and be able to identify 2 different areas here. One is related to the intrinsic motivation that you've got, which is your effort. So this is where you have accelerated, you've amplified your efforts to create better performance and therefore productivity. You can see here that some of the factors that underlie that: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. These are 3 things which are in, it's actually quite old now, Dan Pink's Puzzler Motivation story, which I think we're kind of familiar with, but a quick recap. Autonomy, it's about how we direct our own lives. Mastery is around desire to get better and better at something which is important to us. And purpose is the yearning to do something for something which is larger than ourselves. That might be our society, it might be our family. I've actually added on a 4th one here, which doesn't feature in Dan Pink's story, but that's well-being. And I think that's one thing which has come out of lockdown, that understanding that when people are in the right space, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, socially, then they're able to perform better. Because we have also seen when they're not, it's not going well. So with respect to well-being, I mean, that's probably a whole webinar in itself, right? But if you wanted to look into that, there's a chap called Franklin Covey that's written The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And his 7th one is called Sharpen the Saw. And that's all about creating that balanced program for self-renewal. So if you as a leader are feeling run down right now, just understand that your effort and how that works won't just be impacting you, it'll be impacting your business. So that's the effort. And then we talk about impact. And here we get into really familiar territory. Think about your annual performance reviews. They'll very frequently measure how things get done against your values and your behaviors that you've set up, your expectations for the way people will conduct their business. And also the most familiar thing to you, what gets done. And if you look at that entire sheet and everything that I've said so far, often the only thing we're thinking about in terms of productivity is what gets done. So just think more broadly in terms of how to expand that, because these are each one individual levers as to how we can improve productivity. So that's focusing on individual, if we scale that up and think, well, those individuals are in a team. So let's think team now. So think in your business, who have you got sat around you in your leadership team? Have you got the right people around you in your business team as leaders? Who are you listening to? Why? Okay, these are really important questions, and this is about how you're interfacing in your leadership team, and ditto, each one of those are likely to potentially have their teams as well. So in terms of this, I mean, Gallup's done this, there's quite a lot of stats actually in this particular area, and Gallup's one of them that mentions that a highly engaged team is 21% more productive and 22% more likely to give profitability to your company. In terms of the individuals and how that team is put together, diversity, you know, there's actually loads of studies, but there's a couple here to mention. So a diverse team will outperform individual decision makers 87% of the time. So why don't we do it, right? So look in the mirror. Are you seeing lots of similar people around you? If so, have a think about how you can create more of a diverse culture. McKinsey showed some studies about the more diverse top teams are, the more likely that company will be a top financial performer. They also did one which showed that if you've got an inclusive culture, you're 39% more likely to have enhanced customer satisfaction. So it just runs into lots of different angles of your business. So it's the team players valuing their differences. What happens when things go wrong? Collaboration versus competition. Do we all still start sort of fighting against each other, or do we all pull together? And think about the leaders that you've got in your business who are leading these teams. That's that classic servant leadership, unblocking the path. The key role is how to get things out the way so that the individuals and the team can perform. So it's thinking about gaining engagement, not just compliance. So that's looking at individual, and then looking at team. And now let's think scale up, and let's think as leaders of our business at a business level. What are the factors here that come into play? So there's two different things here that we can think of, well, I can think of. Is the first one is around how you are leading your team and leading your business. And that inspirational leadership can amplify and accelerate your productivity. So the first thing is like your messaging. I mean, can you articulate your vision, mission, values, behaviors on a page? Are you able to do that easily? More importantly, can the people within your teams do that? When you're setting your objectives, I take for granted that you understand what your outputs are and what your profit drivers are and what your, measures are. In terms of unpacking that and setting objectives, are they, compliance oriented in terms of if you don't do this, then there's a problem? Or are they inspirational stretch goals, the shooting for the moon style goals where we're trying to push people to gain even more? So there's particular ways you would roll that out, which is different to setting objectives, which are compliance led. And on the habits for high performance, thinking through your organization, it's almost been, I don't know how to, it's more sensitive in these times of lockdown. Your meeting structure, the pulse that you're setting, the culture that you're setting, the tone that you're setting. If you're doing everything on Microsoft Teams or Google Meet, etc., how are you starting those meetings? Have you got the right cadences and rhythms in place? So these are all the things which kind of all sort of sit under inspirational leadership. And I'm sure actually if we unmuted now, people would have suggestions here too. But there's another thing to think here. So we talked about, imagine you've got those highly engaged people, they're in their teams. Sorry about this. Yeah, not to worry. They're in their great teams. And then you're in your business and you've got some great inspirational leadership, but they haven't got the right tools in place, right? I can't do their job. This is enabling people to do their job. They need the right equipment and processes. And you don't want people to be thinking that they're wading through bureaucratic treacle in terms of the numbers of decision making and the sorts of processes that you're making them do to be able to get things done, which is enablement. So all of those factors are create the input, and different buttons within that will be more important to you in your business than the person metaphorically sat next door to you in this room. And the key here is for you to look at that and understand which are the ones are the buttons to press.
It's so interesting because there's not many things that business leaders can look at their business and say, you know, what could make me 20% more profitable? And actually having a high performing team, according to Gallup, gives that kind of return. And, you know, I've really noticed that People Puzzles, we've gone on this journey of being pretty well organized in January and then going through a period of time of sort of scenario planning and chucking plans out the window and reforming around more urgent responses to COVID. And it definitely feels like we're now in a place where returning to that measured rhythm, probably different to January, but getting back into that rhythm is now really more important than ever. And we use a sort of 3 monthly rocks, we call them, because we follow the EOS platform of managing a business, entrepreneur's operating system, but really making sure that that is set across the business and it is stretching and designed for high performance. Is kind of something that you can't just take your eye off. You have to be living that way of running your business. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a magic wand? I don't think there is really. But look, let's get on to a few practical thoughts, if I can make my mouse go the right direction this time. What should business leaders do in the light of sort of understanding some of these levers and some of that model?
Well, there is a lot to unpack, as you've seen, in terms of understanding your output divided by your input and understanding which of these measures and which are the areas to look at. So my suggestion is that the first thing is just to stop. Stop, give yourself time, breathe, assess, reflect, seek to understand rather than to be understood. So just collect around you information. So listen to the people around you. Give space for the obvious. Asking how people are, like quite open questions, will often reveal more to you than some very direct questioning around how do we increase the productivity of our business. You can translate things that people are saying to you within a model to then get to that second stage. And that second stage is then acting rather than reacting. And this is where I think actually sometimes small and medium-sized companies are actually better off. They're more nimble. And what you've just described there, Ally, is like emergent strategy. So really conscious of finger on the pulse and living the moment, and for flexing your business strategy around the circumstances. And I think that's what's got to happen here. So it's looking at involving the key stakeholders, understanding who they are. They might be your customers, it might be your employees, it might be your suppliers, etc. So identify them and start to articulate the new contract or the new way of working and what that will look like, rather than just going back to as of old, because we know things have changed. And the other thing I'd suggest is showing your vulnerability through this, just an understanding and articulating that this is an emergent thing. We are in the middle of a giant global experiment. Things are happening to us as we go along. I may need to revise what I'm saying now in 3 months' time, but this is the picture as I see it now. But it's fair to say that I think there's one of the models that we use at People Puzzles, which is quite helpful here. And it's around, for that nimbleness and flight of foot, it's not doing one thing at a time. There's actually a little word in there, think big, but the little word is and. It's doing both things at the same time. So they're not a contradiction, they're not incompatible, they're not dichotomous. We're talking about acting in parallel, in series. So you think big, understand what your plan is, map out your vision, understand as much as you can at the minute, using some of the factors we've mentioned earlier, but then drill down and act practically. So marginal gains here are potentially as important as step changes. So it may then come out in terms of your planning. It might be quite small things. For instance, we're going to start, because a lot of our meetings are going to be remote, we're going to start every meeting with sharing a small act of kindness, or perhaps just how are things, or share some good news. Even if that's my dog's been now sitting when I, whatever it is, but just to get the meeting starting to set a tone, but just understand that's a small thing, quite practical, but it impacts your culture. And then if that's one of the things for you that you think you need to be looking at, then you're actually thinking big at the same time as acting small. And there's so many different examples here in terms of practicalities. I've seen people revising benefits, a work from home package. You've got things like remote onboarding. How do we make that more effective so people are quicker to be, productive? And just sort of setting, or just even revising policies, taking the moment to reflect and go, these sorts of policies aren't working for us. There's quite a lot of different practical things that are suitable for some businesses and not for others. So it's quite difficult to kind of obviously go through everything. But what I would say is, like, take that time to reflect and do the think big and act practical.
Yeah. I mean, we've got this model at People Puzzles, this wheel that we've got on the right hand side here. And that's the thing about people. People are so complicated. There's so many factors of like understanding human behavior, and then we've got behavior at work, and actually productivity comes down to whether, as you've said, both individuals can be productive, whether teams can be productive, and actually how people are led and what the culture is, and how talent is sort of trained and developed and retained, and then what the structure of the whole organization is, and then, as you talked about earlier, like what processes and policies we have that either enable or disable people. And it is just something that is in the round and wrapped up. And so there's many factors that we need to work through to really improve productivity. But the results when we help people to be more productive are fantastic. So look, we're coming to the end of our webinar, and just to remind everybody, we've been doing a fortnightly webinar series. All of the recordings are available on our website, so you can go back and watch any of those. And we're going to take a pause now and restart in September. If anybody would like a complimentary 30 minutes one-to-one with someone from the team about issues raised today, and any help that you need for your business on this journey, we'd love to hear from you. Please do ask us. And we've got a little poll because we're really keen to know what you think. So 2 questions. The first one is just how valuable was the webinar? So hopefully you can just do a quick click there. And then with the second one, we're just replicating the question that Karen showed us earlier about during lockdown, during the uncertainty of COVID and lockdown, my business has been as productive as before. So if you're happy to give a vote, as long as we get a fair number of votes on question 2, we're going to share the results of that on our LinkedIn. Karen and I will both share that. So please do feel free to connect with us. And we'll put that out, and we'll also send that round with the webinar recording. So we don't have time for any further questions today, but if you feel like something wasn't answered, please do also send that in. Thank you very much for joining us and being part of the webinar today, and look forward to seeing you in September. And Karen, thank you so much for sharing those models with us and your expertise. It was fantastic.
Great. Well, have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.